I think we'll get started. Good morning, everybody. I want to welcome everybody today to University Express. We have our very last virtual class of this semester, which was spring 2024, spring and summer. So I hope everybody has really enjoyed all the classes we've had. It's been an amazing semester, about 400 classes. So thank you all for being a part of that. Today we have a really special instructor. Um, Mike is a local guy who has written 12 books now. This book we're going to be talking about was his third, I believe, but he was born and raised in Western New York, had a lot of different, very interesting jobs along the way to becoming a very successful author. In 2013, he and his family moved to the Pacific Northwest. He's been involved bike messenger, network administrator, tour guide, school bus driver. As I mentioned, he's written 12 books now. Bunch of them are about Buffalo, which is awesome. I had the pleasure of meeting him in person earlier this summer. He did a University Express class for us on his brand new book, which was launched in Buffalo. His book launch was here in town. I ordered the book myself on Barnes and Noble. It's called 15 Minutes Bamboozled in Buffalo. It's all about, for those who are interested in art or history of Buffalo, it's about the Green Lightning and artist Billy Lawless. So it's super interesting, lots of pictures and backstories. So I would encourage you to look that up if you're so inclined as well. It was a really good read. But today we have Mike, and Mike, thank you for being part of University Express. We love having you as part of our program and taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with us and all of our students who today are going to learn more about Buffalo's Polish gangsters, the Korney gang. This is another one of Mike's books. He's going to be summarizing all the interesting details for us today. So it's set in Buffalo, New York during Prohibition. This story revolves around an East Side group of Polish gangsters. I'm going to let him tell you all the details, but as far as University Express, our virtual classes go, just so you know, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mike, you are not, no one's able to see you on camera, and your microphone is muted for the duration of the class. You can communicate with us or ask any questions through the chat button, which is at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Mike was fantastic about last virtual class we did, taking a few questions at the end. So I will be monitoring that from him. Feel free to send in any comments or questions you might have. So without further delay, I'm going to turn things over to Mike. Thank you again for being with us today.
Hello again, and thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I enjoy doing these and talking about some Buffalo history, which is, even though I moved to the other side of the country, Buffalo history is still my thing. I still love talking about it and still write about it because that's what I know. So today we're going to talk about, which I think it was my third book. They call me Korney. We're going to talk about Buffalo's Polish gangsters, the Korney gang. This book came out in 2009. I wrote it in 2008. And it started out by, I was originally looking at doing something with Italian gangsters. So I was digging through newspaper articles and actually through some old files and stuff. And I kept seeing these Polish gangsters from the 1920s. We're 100 years away from that. That's crazy now. But the 1920s. And I just became fascinated with it. So what I did was I did a lot of research and found out that there was quite a story. So They Call Me Korney is the book, and this is the book here, or here, right here. And what I'll do is I'll give you a little bit from the introduction to give you a little idea of what the story's about. Over the years, I did a lot of talks in Buffalo to groups, and I got emails. I still get emails every once in a while. People that found out that they were related or We're happy that I wrote this because, they they found the Polish history just as interesting as all the other history, and not a lot of people were writing about it. So the tale you're about to read, or today you're going to hear, is a fascinating one as they come. It includes drama, intrigue, betrayal, murder, lies, gangsters, robberies, and quite possibly corrupt or at least overzealous police. This is the tale of one of the most prolific groups of gangsters to ever roam the streets of Buffalo, New York. And it's all true. 1920s were a unique time in American history. The government sought to keep the growing immigrant population at bay by eliminating alcohol from public consumption when they passed the 18th Amendment to the Constitution and created prohibition. That would turn out to be a colossal mistake as it led to the flourishing of organized crime and made millionaires of many relatively ordinary men, including Joseph P. Kennedy, Al Capone, and Lucky Luciano. And in Buffalo, there was Stefano Magaddino, who came from Brooklyn and ended up running the Buffalo Mafia. So across the United States and Canada, men, many of Italian descent, found themselves in the middle of lucrative businesses, importing, bootlegging, and selling alcohol to what they called soft drinkeries and speakeasies. In the Buffalo area, most of the rackets were run by Magaddino, and the Polish tried to imitate the success the Italians were having, and many thought they would succeed. So, who we're going to talk about is a couple different people. First, we've got a man named John Big Korney Kwiatkowski. His family settled on Sycamore Street. All this takes place on the east side, except for a couple locations, but all the people were located on the east side of Buffalo. He was born November 7th, 1904. And another guy, part of this story, is Anthony Shidi Kalkevich. And he was born in 1896. So you could see he's, 8 years older than Korney. And he lived on Lapeer Street. He was the oldest of the gang. This guy, Stefan Bali Zalkowski, was born in 1905. His family was in the meat business. In fact, he also worked in, they had a meat, meat stand. I don't know if it was at the Broadway Market. I believe it was. And he had worked there on and off again. And the last part of the band was this guy. He lived on Sweet Avenue, Zygmunt Ziggy Poloharski. And I was never quite able to determine his age, but he's got an interesting story we'll hear about later on. So all of these guys were the main core of this group. So they're all involved in different ways. So January 15th, 1920 was when Prohibition went into effect. And what did that mean? That meant that there was no longer legal alcohol available. They couldn't sell it, they couldn't consume it. So people like Korney decided that they were going to find a way to make money in this operation. And there were many people like him doing this. And what he did was he got into bootlegging. And he had a place in Depew where Depew was like way out in the sticks back in 1920s compared to downtown Buffalo. So what he was doing was brewing beer and bottling it there. And then he had a group of, speakeasies or saloons that were still buying beer, and he would be delivering it to them. He claimed he was making, in today's dollars, about $3,000 a week, which is a lot of money. So he was doing pretty good for himself. Now, going back to Kalkevich, he's the older guy, and what happens is Kalkevich had a gang, a bunch of different guys in it. We'll talk about them in just a minute. And he was a hardened criminal. He had spent time in Auburn prison before he was 20 years old. He had a quick temper, fast fists, but he was kind of slovenly. But he ran this gang on the east side, and mainly they were involved in burglaries. He wasn't a mastermind, and he often worked in his own neighborhood instead of going outside of the neighborhood, which would be the smart thing to do. So this is burglaries are and safe cracking as a lot of what these guys did. So there's three other guys: Edward Larkman, Joseph Bartkowiak and Lawrence Trimpa, who were the part of the Kalkevich gang. Now, they did a lot of safe cracking. This is an old safe showing some tools that would have been used to crack safes or work on burglaries like this. Korney had his own gang, which was mainly Ziggy and Bali. So after some time, some of Kalkevich's gang gets tossed in the clink, and they're sent away. So him and Korney start working together. They're both running these, these gangs on the east side, so they're constantly running into each other. They see each other at the, the saloons. They know each other, so they decide it's time that they start working together. Now, the first job that they pulled together was a grocery store safe in either 1923 or 24. Korney was a younger guy. He was bigger. He was also smarter. He had new ideas and new techniques for doing crime. So what they did in order to get in the safe at this grocery store was they cracked the spindle off the safe with a big hammer. Instead of doing the, picking the lock, trying to get the combination or anything like that, they actually just took this big hammer and they pounded the spindle right off, and they were able to get into the safe. Shortly after Christmas 1925, they broke into the working girls' home on East North Street. Korney and another member, Joe Kornacki, cracked the spindle. They left with the equivalent of $12,000 in today's money. They went back to Korney's house and they split the money. Kalkevich said he did over 40 safe jobs in his criminal career. And he was so good that even though every member of his group had been picked up for questioning at various times, they were never convicted for any of these safe robberies. So as Korney and Kalkevich worked together, the power dynamics started to shift, and Korney was becoming the leader. He would say things like, "A dead man tells no tales," and "women have no place knowing anything that's going on." So Korney got a tip that this place, the art workshop on East Ferry Street, um, what time they delivered their payroll. Because what happens is back in these days, the payroll used to be delivered by armored car, cash, and then everybody would get paid in cash, either in an envelope or handed right to them on payday. So an employee inside told them what, when, and what time they usually got paid. So for several weeks, they cased the joint, trying to figure out the best way to pull off this robbery. Korney brought another guy in, this guy Smithy from Chicago, who I was never quite able to figure out who exactly he was. So the art workshop had 300 employees that were paid in cash. Ward Pierce, I'm sorry, was the paymaster. At 5:30, they got paid, and that was a signal that the employees were going to line up for their pay. So Kalkevich and Joe Kornacki were the lookouts while Korney, Bali, and Smithy entered the building. Each wore amber-colored horn-rimmed glasses and hats, and they each carried a revolver. When the bandits entered the room and ordered everyone to raise their hands, Mrs. Ottinger, who was handing the envelopes out, threw the tin box with the envelopes into the corner. She just whipped it in the corner. This distracted them enough, and she ran. Ward Pierce saw an opportunity, and he reached for his gun, but Bali fired first, and then Korney and Smithy. Pierce fell, and they ran to the corner and grabbed as many envelopes as they could before running out to the waiting car. They raced in a stolen Cadillac to Lathrop Street, where Korney's Buick was waiting. He, Tony, and Smithy jumped from the stolen car. Korney and Bali left the car at Lane's Brewery and took a streetcar back. And the other three got into Tony's car, and they all met into Korney's car, and they all met back at Tony's house. Now, the tin box had over $100,000 in it. They escaped with almost $24,000. They emptied the envelopes, and Korney left with all the money, as usual. There were several witnesses, but no clues. The police were stumped and believed that out-of-town thieves were responsible for this. The stolen Cadillac had no clues in it except for one dropped penny. A few days later, Korney split the money. Tony was given $3,000 for his part. Korney kept $23,000 for himself. And Victor Chojnicki, the inside employee who tipped them off, was given $1,200 for his part in it. Now, Tony, by this time, knew he was no longer the boss of his own gang. Edward Larkman, mentioned him earlier. He had worked with Kalkevich. He lived on the east side, but he was not a member of the gang. He was a petty criminal. He was arrested a couple dozen times. He was sent to prison in 1924 for a second-degree rape for having a 17-year-old girlfriend who he married before he was sentenced. Now, the night of the art workshop robbery, Larkman was at a wedding. Unfortunately, Ward Pierce died from his gunshot wounds, and a witness identified Larkman, who wasn't even there. The police didn't have proof, but they spread out across the city looking for Larkman. Now, he's got this long record, so he decided to run. He went to Detroit, where police eventually tracked him down. They tried to bribe a witness to say that Larkman was there by saying they'd tear up this witness's long record and get him a job. In the end, Larkman was tried. It was one of the longest jury deliberations at that time. They took 14 ballots, and 4 jurors believed that he was not guilty. But on the 15th ballot, they were able to convince them, and Larkman was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Korney liked new suits, fancy cars, and he needed money to live that lifestyle. The gang did some jobs that the police still believe were done by outsiders. This is typical clothing of the 1920s, fancy suits and hats. Korney did slip up once, and he spent 6 months in prison, which slowed his suit buying down for a while. But by 1927, Tony had a new girlfriend, and he decided he wanted to get out of the crime racket. He'd lost his game to Korney, so he just stopped working with them. In 1928, the Korney gang prepared to rob the Duffy Silk Mill on Guilford Street. On March 16th, they gathered at Korney's house on Littlefield Street, headed to the silk mill around 9:45 a.m. and waited for the armored car to arrive with the $87,000 for payroll. Again, this is what they've gotten into. They got out of, every once in a while they would do some other small job. They'd rob tires or whatever, but this was the big stuff they did. These are armored car robberies. This time, 6 members of the gang were involved. Ziggy and another waited at the gate while the others ran towards the armored car and the armored guard as the guard exited the truck with the money. They stopped the guards inside who hesitated before they finally dropped the payroll bag. Bolly grabbed 2 more bags from the truck, and they were able to get away with $299,000 in today's money. Korney kept $174,000 of it just for himself. Ziggy bought a brand new car, and he bragged to Tony, who wasn't involved because he said he was out of the racket. Now, Korney came upon a new scheme to rob a taxi carrying registered mail from the train depot. He wanted a machine gun, and he called Smithy from Chicago again, who was able to get a machine gun and bring it to Buffalo, thought to be the first machine gun in Buffalo at the time. So in mid-October 1928, they met at Korney's place. At 11 p.m., they drove in a stolen Lincoln to Elk in Michigan to wait for the passing taxi. So registered mail, a lot of it used to go by train. These taxis would pick it up, and they'd have several guards with them, and they'd bring it to the mail, to the post office. So when this taxi stopped at a traffic signal, the gang jumped out and just started shooting. They just started shooting at the taxi, didn't care. These guys were they were cold-blooded and criminals, and that's as good as we can get. We can't say anything else. That's what they did. Now, across the street, you can see in this picture, this was a rendering from the newspaper. Across the street was Vincent J. Connors, a motorcycle policeman. He started to ride over as this melee ensued. Before the shooting even happened, he thought there was an accident, so he rode over. Well, these guys started shooting. There was a railroad policeman riding in the car. He was struck by a bullet. 2 employees in the back seat were dragged out by the gang, and they started to throw the mail bags into the stolen Lincoln. Korney saw Connors approaching, and he aimed his machine gun right at him and just started shooting dozens of bullets at the officer, who was hit several times and fell to the ground. Detective Chief John Reville was certain it was an out-of-state gang responsible. They could not believe that somebody in Buffalo was smart enough to pull off some type of robbery like this. They recovered these empty mail bags from a yard at 804 Clinton Street. But Korney had made a colossal mistake. There was little of value in all these mail bags. They didn't get any money. They didn't get any good registered mail. There weren't checks. There was nothing. The robbery had injured several people. Vincent J. Connors was not killed, and the gang had nothing to split. This brought the police, though, looking out in full force, spanning across the city, looking for who would attack a police officer like this. But by 1929, they were looking for another big score. They had to just keep going on. Tony had moved to Depew, and he was living out there with his girlfriend. So Korney visited once, and they're hanging out, drinking a beer. They walk out and back, and Korney's like, "You've got a barn back here." He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Why don't we set up a brewery here, and we'll become partners?" And Galkevich is like, "I don't know." And he's like, "Come on, we'll do it. This is all you got to do." So Tony agreed, and they set up a brewery in the barn and became partners once again. But there was another problem. Victor Choznicki, the guy who had given the gang the heads up about the art workshop robbery, was in a bind. So what happened was he was involved in a robbery over on Broadway, and when their car was taken off and escaping, they hit another car, and I don't believe he was even driving. They hit another car, and the people in that car were killed. So there were 2 people killed. So now the police were looking for these people involved in this robbery, but more so because they killed 2 innocent people. So Choznicki was desperate. He goes to Korney. He says, "I need to get out of town. I need you to give me money so I can leave town and never come back." Korney's like, "Why would I do that?" He goes, "Because I know things about you and your gang, and if you don't help me out, I'll have no choice but to rat on you." So Korney's like, "All right, tell you what, um, come meet me tomorrow at Tony's house in Depew, and we'll talk about it." So then out of nowhere, Korney calls Tony and tells him to get Ziggy and Bolly and meet them at Tony's house the next night. So Korney arrived early. Him and Tony are sitting around, and they're having a beer. They're talking. Tony's a little unnerved because he's not sure what's going on. This just came out of nowhere. He doesn't know anything about Victor yet. So they went for a walk. Then they went for a drive. Korney's like, "Get in the car. Let's go for a drive." So they went for a drive. I'm not sure what Korney's motive was at this point, but they go for a drive. They come back to the house here. And when they get back, Korney's like, "Why don't you go change and put some old clothes on, put an old suit on, because that's everybody's got a dozen suits." After he changed, they went out behind the barn, and Korney hands him a shovel and says, "Start digging." So now, at this point, he still doesn't know about Victor, and he's told to dig this 4-foot um, hole in the ground behind the barn. I'm guessing that Tony's thinking he's digging his own grave at this point. But he wasn't sure, so he does what what Korney says, digs this 4-foot hole behind the barn because no one was safe from Korney's wrath. Oop, back up. So what happens is Victor arrives with Bolly, and they come out to the barn. As soon as they get out to the barn, Bolly starts shooting, hits him in the head, and starts putting bullets in him. He ends up putting at least 15 shots into Victor. He falls onto the ground, bleeding out. He's dying. Tony, Bolly, Korney, just standing there. Tony's eyes are wide. He doesn't know what's going on. Why did this happen? Korney looks over at him and says, "Okay, push him into the ground and bury him." And now he knows what the hole was for. And now he knows that nobody is safe. So Korney planned another big holdup, this time at the Fetters plant on the west side. They were a large manufacturer of auto radiators. So Tony, now he's back in the fold. He has no choice because he's been involved in a murder. He's an accessory to a murder. He had been brewing beer with Korney, so he's just stuck at this point. So Fetters was a plant on Tonawanda Street, and they were a large manufacturer of auto radiators and other things that they manufactured at that time. Bolly rented a garage here on Potomac Avenue, a few blocks from the plant. Here, they would steal a car and then they'd store it in the garage in the back. Now, the day of the robbery in April 1929, they took two vehicles from Korney's house and they drove here to Potomac. They pulled, it was actually Kalkevich's car, into the garage, and they pulled out this green Nash. Some of them got into this green Nash, or actually, all got in the green Nash, and they parked Corney's truck out on the street around the block. So Tony's car is in the garage here. Corney's truck is around the corner. They get in the stolen green Nash. They all wore different disguises. They used putty on their noses and stuff, everything to make themselves look different. And then they headed over to Fetter's to wait for the armored truck because, again, it was going to be another payroll robbery. This is the Fetter's plant, big plant. The building is still there. I believe they may have already started, but they were planning on building apartments and such inside of the building. So after the armored truck made its delivery, they had been sitting for a while waiting for them, parked far enough away, waiting. So after they made the delivery, Ziggy, Korney, and Tony headed into the Fetter's office while Bali waited outside in the car. So Korney carried a machine gun, which he had cut the handle off of. So now it's just it's a sawed-off machine gun. And he was able to hide it under his jacket while they walked in. They entered the building, and panic ensued. Several shots were fired immediately. The gang was yelling. Elvin Dagler, the assistant treasurer, who had been carrying the payroll, saw the gang as he's coming up the stairs from the basement where the vault was, sees them. He immediately turns around and runs back down into the basement. On the way down, he drops a couple money bags, but he was able to hit the alarm, run into the vault, and slam the gate shut. Now, Ziggy runs down, grabs the door. He's trying to open it. He can't. He could have shot the guy, but he wasn't going to get the money because now the money's locked in there. So because of that, Dagler had saved $574,000 of the payroll. The gang grabbed what had fallen on the ground there. They grabbed those bags and they ran outside. So what happens was there was an employee, John Perriton, who had noticed Bali and something happening outside. So he walked over to Bali and started giving him some trouble. So the two of them started fighting. So those two are fighting. As the other three are coming out of the building, Tony sees what's happening. He runs up and he starts fighting with Perriton also. And Perriton ends up getting shot twice by Tony, who would later claim that it was all an accident. Maybe he had his gun in his hand, which he probably did, and maybe without their fighting, it went off twice at the guy is questionable. So they jumped into their stolen Nash and they sped away. They didn't expect to be followed by two guys who were across the street gassing up their car, and they witnessed the whole thing. So these two guys tailed the car to the Potomac address. They parked down the block because at this point, the gangsters didn't know that anyone was following them. So one of them kept watch what was going on. The gangster's car pulled down the driveway on Potomac. One of the other guys gets out and he runs down a couple blocks to the West Delden police precinct. So a police car was able to leave the station immediately, and two of the gang ends up, Bali and Tony got into the car in Potomac. They're starting back up. Ziggy and Korney get in the truck around the corner and they just drive away. So this car is pulling out of Potomac Avenue, and the cop cars come speeding around the corner. Suddenly they realize that they're being followed, so they take off. So they're on the west side. This is up near Forest and Grant in that area, and they raced around the neighborhood with the cops taking shots at the car. Now Bali is in the front seat. He jumps into the back. He pokes a hole through the canvas, and he starts shooting back at the cops. They race down Bird Avenue. Then they go down to Forest. They make a right on Forest. They make a right on Abbotsford Place. And there, as they're going around the corner, the police were able to shoot out one of the back tires. The car almost flips over, but it doesn't. Tony doesn't lose control, ends up having to stop in the middle of Abbotsford Place. There, He gets out and he carjacks another guy who had another Nash that was driving by. Meanwhile, Bali jumps out of the car. He's got the machine gun and he starts firing at the cops. So they stop their car and they are fanning out. So we've got Officer Glore. He was stuck. He was struck by one of the bullets, while Kalkevich shot at him from in front of 46 Abbotsford Place. Bali covered him as they moved the guns and the clothes into their new stolen car. Unfortunately, Bali dropped one of the money bags. They jumped in the car, sped down Bird Avenue, where they disappeared. Over 150 rounds had been fired during the shootout, and Bali had dropped another $83,000. These guys, they set up these big jobs, but they made mistakes all the time because I don't think they were that good at what they did. They were petty criminals who tried these big jobs and constantly messed up. As criminals, they lost lots of money. They got back to Korney's house. Korney was unfazed. He's like, whatever, we lost money. Um, he didn't realize, and nobody realized at that time, that John Perriton had been killed during that shootout. Next morning, um, Tony's over at Tony and Korney are meet up, and they both realize that the headlines in the paper are showing that the guy had died. So Tony knows that it's not good because he's the one who fired the shots. This time there were plenty of witnesses, and police just started fanning out across the city and picking up any known criminals who could have been involved in this. Tony was identified. So sorry, that didn't help. I apologize for that. So Tony was identified. Korney told him that I'm sorry. Took a big drink there and that didn't help. So Korney told Kalkevich, who's this hardened criminal, if you go and surrender, there's nothing they're going to do. They're not going to break you. You're going to be able to ride this out, and what we'll do is we'll get bail money together and we'll get you out. They knew that he was tough, and so Tony he's out in Depew. He ends up making a deal with the cops. He gets a lawyer, makes a deal, and the cops meet him out in Depew. They arrest him and his girlfriend and another man. They were taken back to Fetters. This is how they did things then. They drove back to the Fetters plant where they had a show up, or basically a lineup, where he stood there and all these people went by and said, "Was that the guy?" And 15 people either completely or partially identified Tony as one of the robbers. He did go inside, so a lot of people would have seen him. Then they took him to City Hospital, where Officer Glore, who had been shot over on Abbotsford, was, and he immediately identified Tony and said, "Yep, that's the guy that shot me." So in the meantime, Ziggy decided he wanted no part of this, and what he did was he left Buffalo. He went to New York City, where he worked for a while. He changed his name, and he disappeared. It wasn't until the 1960s, I think it was 1964, when a woman came forward, called the Buffalo police from Rochester and said, "Hey, you remember this guy, Zygmunt Plaharsky, that you were looking for back in the 1920s? Well, he's been living here right outside of Rochester for a couple decades." He had, at that point, had owned a car dealership, like a used car dealership, and had been living, I guess, straight and narrow for several decades, and he had died. So she said, "Here he is. He's buried. He's gone." And they were able to close the case because he was wanted for murder, for 30 years, and they finally were able to just close the case on him. Now, Kalkevich, he's the guy in jail on the right. He was tough, but there's reason to believe that he was also an opium or a heroin addict. Uh, while he was in jail, he said that the police beat him, they deprived him of sleep, they starved him, and they may have withheld drugs from him, most likely. And if he was an addict, that could have been the deciding factor. Hardened criminal, yes, but going through withdrawals sounds like it was something that he couldn't handle. So Korney and Bali had been planning a robbery to get bail money for him, but it never panned out, so they didn't bail him out. 3 days goes by, and there he is. He's sitting in jail. Finally, he's like, you know what? I've had enough of this. These guys aren't taking care of me, and I'm not going to just sit in jail and rot for this when I wasn't the only one involved. So on May 5th, he gave a verbal confession of all the robberies that they had been involved in, everything that Korney was involved in, including the murder of Victor Chosnicki. The next morning, the police went out to the barn, went right where he had said the body was, and I believe they actually brought him out there. He pointed out, and the police dug up the body of Victor Chosnicki. So they knew he was telling the truth about this, so why would he not have been telling the truth about all the robberies and everything else that they were involved in? So Kalkevich gave up the whole gang. Korney was arrested. He was surprised to hear that Victor's body was found. Because back then, a lot of times, criminals, they'd talk to the press, they'd make statements, they'd say all kinds of things, they'd give statements to the police. Sometimes they were used against them. Sometimes, things were a lot different than they were then. So Korney hires one of the top attorneys in Buffalo, Samuel Fleischman. Bali had been on the run for weeks. Police finally got a tip that he was out in Wyoming County. So they went out there and quietly surrounded this farmhouse that he was at. And he tried to escape, and they ended up having a shootout, and they shot him. So they think that they've got Bali. He's on his deathbed. They're trying to get a confession from him. But Bali is not that guy. He's not Tony. He's dying, and he's like, I'm not telling you anything. They told him that Korney gave him up. He called Korney yellow. He ended up being rushed to Buffalo for surgery, and he survived. Meanwhile, the press was having a field day with the case. There were rumors that Korney confessed. He called Kalkevich names, but he said he was just a simple bootlegger. That's all he ever did. He claimed he was nowhere near the Fetters plant at the time of the robbery, said he had witnesses, and one of them was a local politician too, Leon Kashik. So why would anybody not believe him? Korney, Bali, and Kalkevich, they'd each receive separate trials. And unlike modern days, trials occurred sometimes just weeks after arrests, and sentencing was usually immediate. Korney's trial started in September 1929. It was a media circus, like any media circus you've seen before. This 1929, a lot of reporters. Back then, it would have been mainly newspaper reporters, people clogging the courtrooms to see this because Korney, he's this tall, handsome, good-looking, blonde, Polish guy, dressed well. Everybody liked him, and everybody wanted to see what happened to the blonde beer baron. Here's a scene from Korney's trial. He's on the far right. So Kalkevich would be the state's main witness. Even though he will be tried for murder himself, he is still the main witness because he ended up giving, originally it was just a verbal confession. He ended up giving a written, signed confession. So he would testify against Korney, his former prodigy, and then later his boss. His sister, Martha Lakomska, testified that everything that Tony said was correct, but also something that nobody knew before. Edward Larkman wasn't at the art workshop, he was innocent. So this was something that made headlines at the time because Edward Larkman, who we talked about earlier, he had been sentenced to death for the art workshop robbery, and he had said he wasn't there. So this was big news. Korney's trial continues. Several witnesses brought forward. They all said that he was at Leon Koshik's saloon during the Fetters robbery, and he could not have been involved. So what would they do? Finally, Korney decided to testify in his own defense. He lied about everything. He implicated Kalkevich. Finally, the jury was sent out to deliberate. After 3 hours of deliberations, they found Korney not guilty. He was a free man. That night, there were celebrations across the east side. There's no alcohol, but there was alcohol flowing that night. So now, although Kalkevich was the state's top witness, they still had to try him, and they were trying him for murder of John Perrotin. Their goal was to get him a lighter sentence if he ended up getting convicted of this. By the time the trial did start in October, the press had moved on to other stories. He was not as flashy, he wasn't as important as Korney, and this trial was basically just a rehash of everything that had taken place in the Korney trial. His attorney called no witnesses. In 25 minutes, the jury had found him guilty. District Attorney Guy B. Moore asked for life in prison, not the death sentence, but the judge ordered the death sentence. Kalkevich appealed, and he was able to postpone his execution. So in November 1930, Governor Franklin Roosevelt commuted his sentence, and in 1932, he was able to leave the death house at Sing Sing Prison. He ended up serving his his sentence at Attica Prison, and in 1949, he motioned to be released, but he was denied. 1964, Tony Kalkevich was finally released from prison, and he died in 1977 in Clarence. So he was able to spend about 13 years out, free man, after all of this horrible incident. So, thinking that he was a smart man after Korney was acquitted, he decided to testify at Bali's trial, and that came about in November 1929. Korney testified. He told the same exact story that got him off, but this time, different jury, different outcome. It's not the same. After a quick trial, Bali was found guilty and ordered to die in the electric chair at Sing Sing Prison. Now, so because of this outcome, the DA turned around and charged Korney with perjury. He was unable to raise the equivalent of $314,000 in bail, and he sat in a cell until his trial in January 1930. This time, Korney wasn't a big man. No one cared. The press had moved on. And after a short trial, he was found guilty of perjury and sentenced to 20 years in prison. He was sent to Auburn Prison, where he was finally paroled in 1944 with a condition that he could never return to Buffalo. He moved to Syracuse, he got married, and he lived on a dairy farm until he died in 1964. Bali was the only member of the Korney gang that was actually executed. Prior to the event, he was calm and showed no remorse. He sat in the electric chair, smiled for the press. He was a sick individual. On May 29th, 1930, he died in the electric chair at Sing Sing Prison. And this is a copy of the statement from the physician at Sing Sing Prison that says, an autopsy performed on the body of the above named electrocuted May 29th, 1930, in accordance with the law, revealed all vital organs to be normal. So the last person related to this that we haven't discussed, we had mentioned a few times, was Edward Larkman. He was sentenced for murder in 1926, sentenced to death in April, but he appealed and he was able to hold off execution until January 1927. At 11:45 p.m., a mere 15 minutes before his scheduled execution, the governor commuted his sentence. He's saying that the state did not sufficiently prove their case. So in 1929, he and two others stuck in prison. He escaped from Auburn prison. They were all captured 6 days later. And it was during this time, it's 1929, where Kalkevich and his sister both come out and say that Larkman was not involved in the art workshop robbery, so he couldn't have been the killer. So Governor Lehman, he began an investigation into this. Took 3 years while Larkman sits in prison. And in December 1933, he was given a mercy pardon and he was released. But Edward Larkman had been a criminal most of his life, and he was unable to fit back into society, fell back into his old ways. He was arrested for a series of burglaries, and he was convicted, this time as a third-time offender, and received a 20 to 40-year sentence in Clinton prison. He was released in 1952, and through all this time, he had trying appeals and motions and all kinds of things. But he was released in 1952, arrested again in 1955 because he went back into crime. But he argued that his second offense should have been erased because he was pardoned. So he kept trying over and over, 13 times. And finally, he was successful. And in 1956, they had that pardon removed, and he was sentenced to 10 to 20 years. And the murder conviction was was removed from his record in 1959. And he was paroled for that last time. Released in 1961, or released in 1959, I'm sorry. And he died just 2 years later in 1961, and he was 60 years old. And my friends, that is a quick rundown of the Polish gangsters in Buffalo, the Korney gang. The book is 200 pages long. There's a lot more photos inside of the book, and if it's something that you're interested in, if you've read it before, or a lot of people have questions. I took a lot of pictures. I went around the city and took pictures of buildings and houses that people had lived in, because a lot of the buildings and houses were still there. There's a lot of pictures of cars showing the type of cars. There's a lot of photos of pictures. Victor, who was murdered, and a lot of the other people that had been murdered. Multiple pictures of Korney. There was a guy that I know who, this is his mug shot. I had met a guy who, when I was doing my mafia research, who ended up being given Korney's entire file from the police department by a former officer who was teaching, I believe he was teaching some criminal justice something. And this is what they used to do. They used to just take these files and walk away with them. And this guy was given all this. So he's got tons of photos of Korney. And he was able to let me borrow them because I was writing this story. Did you have any questions? Were there anything? Because I can answer anything anybody might have. I
Okay.
did. I
Oh,
did meet
Mike,
a lot
I'm
over
sorry
the
for
over the
interrupting.
Oh yeah, go ahead. No, I was gonna
Oh,
say a
I
lot
was
of people
gonna
over the
say,
years have come forward telling me that they were related to multiple people that they didn't know. I met members of the Zalkowski family. I met several people who found out that they were related to either Korney or Kelkevich and didn't even know it because they were, their families were horrified that they were members of this family, so they never talked about it. And years later, they found information about it.
okay, I was just typing into the chat, everyone. If somebody has a question, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you so you can speak directly to Mike. I did get a couple personal messages through Mike.
Mhm.
Uh, Someone loved the story, ordered the book already.
Oh, great.
Someone wanted to thank you for spending this time with us and telling the story about your book. Um,
Mhm.
and I had a question as to how you do your research. So how did you find out? It's kind of crazy to think all this stuff happened in Buffalo. How did you, so long ago too, how did
Yeah.
you uncover like the whole story, the mysteries?
So what happened was, at the time, I was just going through newspaper articles. At the time, I was a bike messenger, so I was working downtown all the time, and I would spend hours in the library when I had time in between calls. And so I would go and I was just when I found the time frames, then I would just go through microfilm and just scroll day by day by day by day, and just make copies of all the articles. So then when I narrowed it down, I knew the county clerk really well, the county clerk office itself, I should say. And I knew all the books, I knew how to search for things. And I went and I actually had them pull the court files. And they found all the court files. And I actually had copies of the trial transcripts from Kalkevich's trial and all these things. And I was able to take all these things and put them together. And in the book, there's a lot of quotes that come either from the trial itself or from statements that the people had made. So that's how I was able to put the story. I wrote the story because obviously they don't give their whole story. You know, nobody ever tells everything. So I put it together as a novel, but there's a lot of direct quotes from them. From the trial and such, and that's it. It was just hours and hours and hours of research, and again from newspapers and from the county clerk and reading actual court documents.
Awesome. That's so cool. I had another comment. Very interesting. Thank you so much. You're a great storyteller.
Thank you.
Um, and with that being said, Mike has agreed to come back. His book on the Buffalo Mafia also made for a great story. He's going to join us again this this fall with University Express. So stay tuned for that. For everyone still online, we have a new catalog, a new semester coming out. Catalogs will be out in September at some point, and I do have some more questions though, Mike, coming through. So stay tuned for that. Mike will be back with us in the fall. And so I have a question here. Do
I see
you
that.
know if Officer Glore, who was wounded by the gang, is related to Jeff Glore, the CBS anchor who's from Buffalo?
That's a good question, and I do not know the answer, but I would have to believe they're related some way. The Vincent J. Connors too. I believe, I don't know if they still do, but the police department had an award that they used to give to officers, that was called the Vincent J. Connors Award for bravery or something like that. Um, but I do not know. But that's a very good question, and based on the last name, I would have to believe, especially if Jeff Glore is from Buffalo, that they're related somehow.
Yeah, that's cool. Lots of thank yous coming through, Mr. Rizzo.
I
So thank you,
appreciate it.
Mr. Rizzo. Thank you, Mr. Rizzo. I'm getting a lot of personal messages. So
Sure.
we thank you here too at University Express. You give your time, you volunteer your time with us. We so much appreciate you. Always makes for a super interesting class. We're very excited to have you back. And in the meantime, between now and then, everyone, if you're looking for something to do, I loved that Green Lightning book. It was something I grew up here, lived here my whole life, never knew about that.
Oh, great.
So it's pretty fascinating the research you did on all that.
Thank you.
So pick it up, everyone. And if there's no more questions, we will let everyone get back to your day. Have a wonderful day, and we look forward to seeing you all again real soon.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for
Thanks,
coming.
Mike.